Alright, you guys, I thought I would do a video on what it was like a day in the life of growing up with a pedophile and child molester. When I was young, I was molested by my babysitter's husband, and then my mother met my stepfather, and I'm thinking I was around 8 years old. I was born in 1958. But so she met him, and we would go over to his house a lot and stay the night, stay the weekend, and whatever. And he would sit in his Barca-Lounger and have my sister and I on his lap, and I'm sure he did the same thing to my sister that he did to me, but he would press his erect penis against my backside the entire time. He would, flex it. And my mother would be sitting right there. He would be sitting in his recliner. That's the word I'm trying to think of. I call it a Barca-Lounger, but his recliner. He would be reclining in his recliner, and she would be sitting on the couch with a cigarette stand between the two of them. And he would do that. Well, at that point in time, my father was still alive. And somewhere, I'm thinking I was probably around 12 years old. God gave me a dream. He gave me a couple of dreams around that time. And the dream was about my father, and the dream was about my father's salvation, and that my father did receive salvation. And it didn't alarm me when I had the dream. I didn't cry or anything like that. I was very, very much a daddy's girl. And while my father was still alive, that held my stepfather back to a degree. But my father passed away when I was around 14 years old. His neck had been broken working on an oil rig, and he was in a wheelchair and crutches. Well, his neck was broken, and he was on his back for I don't know how long, but then he got so where he could go on a wheelchair and crutches. And he lived for 10 years after the accident. So God gave me a dream about my father's salvation. And then when I was about 14 years old, my father died. He died of a heart attack. And so after my father died, my mom said that it was as though my stepfather's competition had died. Well, she was partially right. I'm sure that it crossed my stepfather's mind that if my father were alive and he did something inappropriate, that I would tell my father, because I was very close to him. I was very much a daddy's girl. Well, after he was gone, then things definitely became a lot more complicated. And he definitely targeted me. Um, I've tried to remember if he was ever a Freemason. I don't know if he was. I don't think he was. I don't think he was. My grandfather, my mother's father, was definitely a Freemason. Reportedly a 35th degree Freemason. And that ties in with, like, a lot of things. A lot of things. My life didn't even make sense until I put two and two together. But anyway, well, okay, so back to the life of, after my father passed away, my stepfather was, every day it was as though he got up in the morning to try and manipulate a way so where he could put me in a compromised situation. And that was every day of my life. And of course, he had a lot of control. And he always played games. Whenever you're a teenager, the way that you look is a big deal. Well, when you're a teenager, everything's a big deal. Well, I, along with my foster sister and my blood sister, we would alternate doing household chores, dishes being one of those. So every third day, it was my turn to do the dishes. Well, my stepfather is the one who did the cooking. Yes, my stepfather did the cooking, and every third day, it was my turn to do the dishes. And so every third day, he would choose to make something for dinner that would create a horrible mess in the kitchen. And the food in our house was cooked in the little kitchen, and that's where he did the dishes. There was a small table in there with a couple of chairs. And then on the other side was the place where our kitchen table was. Everyone sat down to eat every night for dinner. And you ate everything on your plate. And every third night, when it was my turn to do the dishes, he made something that would just make a wreck of the kitchen. And this one night, he made such a mess that I cried. And I went and got my foster sister, and I brought her in the kitchen, and I said, look around. I said, are these the sort of dishes that you have to do? No, they're not. I said, look at Tammy, you have to look at this. You have to acknowledge that he does this to me. He focuses on me. And finally, she said, yeah, I see it. And then she helped me do dishes. And there were a few times that different ones pitched in to help do dishes. He was unmerciful, though. I mean, that's just like a small example, but oh my goodness. And sometimes he would try to do the nice thing, buy a gift that you really, really wanted, but you did not want to take that because he bought it and you knew why he was buying it. For my 16th birthday, it was the rage at the time to have they were birthstone rings, and the stones went all the way around the ring, and they were stackable. Well, for my 16th birthday, he bought me a red one and a white one, and they were for my left ring finger. And I wanted those rings really, really bad. I could not wear them. And one thing that I will tell you is that, well, when I was a teenager, I did a lot of drugs, and it's a miracle that I didn't die. And this is what I wanted to say is that my stepfather's father, I always called him Grandpa Snell, and he was an Assembly of God preacher. And my stepfather had 7 sisters, and 2 of them were praying saints. And the one, her name was Noni. She was always Aunt Noni to me. And the other was Mary, always Aunt Mary. And Aunt Noni prayed for me faithfully. And I feel sure that that's why my stepfather never was successful in assaulting me. It didn't mean that he didn't try every day of his dang life, but I do believe that he was unsuccessful in assaulting me because of her prayers. But these were the days where, people believed in whipping your kids. And he was a big man, and he was assistant police chief of the town that we lived in for a time. He had a gun. He had a big belt, and that's what he would whip us with, and whip me in particular. And there was a time that I had snuck out of the house, and I had gone down across the tracks to be with some of my friends down there, some of my girlfriends. And I got caught. I snuck out of the house and I got caught coming back in the house. Well, he beat me because he wanted to know where I had been. He wanted me to tell him where I had been, and I wouldn't tell him. And he literally made my backside from my neck to my ankles black and blue, and he broke the skin also. And he stopped because he got tired. So there was that. Then there was a time that I had gone to go visit my grandparents, and they lived in a little town called Cement, Oklahoma. And I don't remember how far Cement was from where we lived in Seminole, but I'd gone to go visit my grandparents, and I was by myself. Well, I'd called home for someone to come and get me, and that someone was supposed to be my brother. Well, whenever it comes time for me to go home, the person who showed up at the door was my stepfather. And I happened to open the door to him. And when I opened the door, I was so scared. I was so afraid. I thought, oh my gosh, this is not good. I got in the car with him and I had to drive home with him. And here's Mr. Assistant Police Chief of the town that we live in, goes and gets a 6-pack of beer, and he's trying to get me drunk. And I took a beer and I pretended to drink it, but I didn't drink it. And I had weed. And so I said, well, I'm going to smoke weed then. So I rolled some joints and I smoked joints all the way home. He did try to put his hand on my boob, but I, pushed his hand away, and then he didn't do anything else after that. And that was as far as he ever got, as far as touching me sexually. The rest, he just beat my ass and stuff, which, anyway. There was a time after I'd moved away from Oklahoma to California, and I literally had to move the state to get away from him and somebody else. But after I had left and had moved to California, I got a phone call from my sister, and she said that she had a car, and she was in college at the time, and she'd gone to my stepfather's house because something was wrong with her car, and he offered to fix it for her. And he never bothered her, and there's a reason for that, but there's no need for that to be said. But anyway, so he offered to fix her car. She's there. He's got his head underneath the hood of her car. And then he tells her that some women make a lot of money, even enough for a new car, if they would just do certain things. So he hit on her, and my sister, it was obvious enough that, there was no mistaking what he was saying. So she said that she jumped in her car and ran every light and sign before she got home to our mother's house, because they had divorced by this time. And she told my mother what happened, and my mother, called him up and, cussed him out. And so my sister was, telling me how shaken that she was. And I didn't say anything at the time, but I thought that's how I lived every day of my life whenever I lived at home. And it started whenever my mother first met him, and didn't end until after I left the state of Oklahoma. But that's how things can happen in a household, and not everybody knows everything that's going on. And especially in our household, it was not good. It was not good. I had 2 stepsisters and 2 stepbrothers, and my one stepsister married a guy that one day I had stayed home from school sick, and he came in my room. I was like 16 at the time, and he came in my room and tried to hit on me, and he was in his underwear. Well, I told my mother about it, and my mother, she told my stepfather about it, and nothing ever happened. But he was related to our family, but he wasn't related because he married in. But there was another child molester. And then, so I had the stepbrothers and sisters, and my one stepsister, I would go and hang out with her a lot. She would take me with her to go different places a lot. And one day we went to go visit her grandfather, who was her mother's father. So we go out on this little farm, and it's me, my stepsister, her new husband, and there were a couple of other people there as well. My stepsister's mother was there, and my stepfather was there too for some reason. I don't know why. But so we all go to this old guy's little farm, and we're walking up as a group, and he looks, like a child molester and a pedophile in overalls. And we walk up there, and my stepsister says, well, now, Grandpa, this is Kathy, and I was probably about 14 years old at this time. And so I'm standing next to him, and he grabs me, and he pulls me to him. He puts his arm around the top of my shoulders. He puts his hand on my face, pulls my face and my mouth to him, and he kisses me right on the mouth, French kisses me right on the mouth, and he grabs me in the crotch. And then, of course, my stepsister comes and, grabs me away from him and, peels his hands off of me and pulls me away. Well, here we are again, another child molester, another pedophile, and he's not related. But there he was. And that's why I say I have been fighting child molesters and child predators since I was 4 or 5 years old. So that was what it was like. There was a lot more. Of course, there's a lot more. And there were definitely, I came to know the Lord Jesus as my Savior when I was 14, and that was a glorious thing. That was my only saving grace at that time. But it did not take away the fact that I still lived in the same house as a child molester and sexual predator. And he did not make it easy. I ran away multiple times. I put myself in very scary situations and life-threatening situations because of running away from home. I married the first time at 17 years old to get away from him. But that wasn't enough. I had to leave the state first. And the thing is that I never struggled with unforgiveness towards him. I never struggled with unforgiveness towards any child predator when I was growing up, because I didn't know that it was just a way of life. It was just a way of life. And whenever I did leave the state of Oklahoma and I moved to California, I was 19. It was May 31st, 1977. And when I moved to California, I was like a bullet dog. Just happy to be alive, just happy that I didn't get the bullet. And I never looked back. And when I was in the airplane, I said to myself, I will not look back. I do not want to look back at that place ever again in my life. I never want to go back there again in my life. I did, but when I got to California, I was safe for a while. Anyway, they're every day, and if it could be twice a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, if he could have jerked me around, he would have. And it does something to you because I know one time I went to a restaurant with my husband, and we walked in and we had to wait a few minutes to be seated. And so I started ticking off to him what each table was doing and who they were and what they were talking about, just like down the row, because I would go in and read rooms that quickly, because that was how I grew up, because I needed to keep my eyes peeled at all times, because I could end up in a compromised situation with him. And I spent every day avoiding that. And thank God, thank God. But he would say things, he would make things like, child predators always want the victim to feel as though they're less than nothing. That is a huge goal for them, is to make the child feel less than they are nothing. It makes the child easier to comply. And my stepfather would always say things. I did a lot of reading during that time. I would read a lot of true crime. I read about the Holocaust. I read a lot about World War II. I read a lot of novels. I read our library out of books. They had to order books for me. I made good grades. I never missed school. Good cripes, if I missed school, I'd have to stay home. And one of the things that was super cool when I was a teenager is that I did get to be politically involved in our state and local politics. And my stepfather was a campaign manager for David Boren, who was it was his first run for governor of the state of Oklahoma. I have pictures of myself with the governor, and our senator, he was the campaign manager for Bill Dawson for his first run for senator for the state of Oklahoma. And then there was Jeff Johnston, who was state representative. It was his first run. And then there was a judge. I forget the judge's name. So we campaigned for all those people. And I did get to be a page in the Senate for Senator Bill Dawson. And Senator Bill Dawson is actually a co-author to the law that was passed for death by lethal injection. And I didn't know that for a long time. I know that when I was a page for him, that he was working on prison reform. But I didn't know that it had to do with death by lethal injection. And Senator Dawson, he was a Catholic man. He was a practicing Catholic man. And he was so lovely to me, so lovely to me. We worked on his campaign, and I worked hard on his campaign, and I talked to people about him. And I loved him, and I listened to him. And I listened to the politics at the time, and the politics was so, you would go and they would be, it was the senators, and they would be yelling at each other and pounding the table, and they'd be so passionate, and it would just be fire. And then after it was over with, everybody would leave, and it was back to no one was mad at anyone anymore. But anyway, Senator Dawson, he was very kind to me, treated me, like an equal. He was a lovely person. He died of a brain aneurysm. I believe that's what it was. A brain aneurysm, or I think it was an aneurysm. Anyway, that was a highlight of, I was able to do a lot of things, even though, I was the captain of our pep squad, and after, years later, becoming an adult and getting in touch with a friend that was a cheerleader, her parents owned the pharmacy, or one of the pharmacies of the town that we lived in, and her mother was grossly abusive to she and her sisters, and she was very, very mean with them, and I never would have thought that. She was one of the sweetest girls ever. Always, her entire life, she was always a sweet girl. And it was so hard to, and no one would have ever known. I don't know. I don't know. It's too bad. A lot of things. That was a bad place to grow up. All around the town, it was a bad place to grow up. And statistically speaking, for the graduating class of 75 and 76, there were a lot of drug and alcohol related deaths, and it would probably set some records if they actually checked But anyway, not an easy place to grow up. Lots of crazy things. And then there are the predators. And one thing that I would say is that it is not hard to catch a predator. There are a lot out there, and if you look, you will see them. And take appropriate action. Call the police. All right. I just, putting that out, putting this video out there so people can understand. And, when that's your life, it changes you. And I heard people say, like, a person that was only touched, they were touched one time and that changed their life forever. That's how evil that's how evil that is. And that's how evil these people are. And I don't even know all that my stepfather was guilty of. His first girlfriend, I think it was killed in a car accident with him. And when he met my mom, there was a lady that was murdered like a block away from us. And I don't know. I don't know, because that accident happened just before he met my mom. No, it couldn't have been his first girlfriend then, because he had 4 kids. I don't know where she came in from then. But that happened, and the woman did get murdered. And I think that's how he ended up at our house in the first place. Investigating. I wouldn't put anything past him. But I wouldn't have put anything. But the other cops, they were just as bad as he was. They were guilty of murder also. They weren't sexual predators that I know of, but there were 2 different factions in our police department. There was the police chief that they hired from Denver, Colorado, and he had his officers with him that he brought, 4 officers with him. And then there was my stepfather and a couple of existing officers prior to when the police chief came from Denver. And it was 2 opposing kind of like parties in our police department. And they were both out for each other. Well, they got my stepfather before he got them, so. But then the end of the police chief, this was my, oh goodness. The police chief ended up with the city's war cannon in his apartment where he had barricaded himself, and he was in a standoff with the other police officers, his officers. That was how he ended up. What kind of chance did we have there? That's why I'm not surprised whenever, they find out that somebody, did something that they shouldn't have been doing, hurting kids or whatever. You see a lot sometimes. All right, well, we'll see what this sounds like. We'll see if I'm going to post this or not. Sometimes I don't. And sometimes when I'm talking, if I'm tired, I start sounding like an Okie because I lived there for 15 years. And sometimes when I'm being sarcastic, I will sound like an Okie. But it is not. It's an honest Okie accent, however bad it is. All right. Lord bless you guys.